High on a hill among Tennessee farmlands and near a winding river stands a place of enduring purpose. That purpose ignited as a spark in the heart of just one man, but caught fire within each passing generation. Now, over a century later, the spark has grown into a beacon that casts a guiding light around the world and into the future. The light first warmed the heart of the spirited Ashley Johnson.
My parents were poor, but my father, being naturally ambitious for his firstborn son, impressed me when I was a small child with the belief that I could be and do something in the world.
Well, certainly Ashley Johnson overcame humble beginnings. It's important to remember that in the post-Reconstruction South, anybody began with humble beginnings. We read about times when he would alternate study with work on the farm, and he learned not only from books, but he also learned to work hard.
Our home was moral in the highest degree, but little was known of Christ. We lacked one thing, which was everything, the knowledge of God.
He describes himself as a sort of a pagan, as a person who grew up quite irreligious. I don't know if it was a crisis, whether it was maturing and growing, but by the time he was a late teenager, became more interested in matters of faith.
At 20 years of age, Ashley Johnson committed his life to God in a revival meeting and was baptized in the French Broad River. This new faith was the dawn of a lifelong ministry.
The thought came to me like a bolt from a clear sky at noonday. Here I am, trifling my time away, knowing the truth, and these people are drifting to judgment in ignorance. I will turn over a new leaf and be a preacher.
Ashley Johnson began studying the Bible, writing articles and books, and preaching in his Tennessee home. In 1884, his efforts eventually led him to oration school in Ontario, Canada, where he met his life partner, Emma Elizabeth Strawn. He returned to the South with Mrs. Johnson at his side.
Ashley worked first as a state evangelist in Tennessee and then South Carolina. As evangelist, he saw this great need for the training of leaders for the church.
I sat by a blazing fire, and my heart was made heavy with the weight of the world's woe. Unexpectedly, it dawned upon me that I could teach men the gospel through the mails, and thus inspire them to proclaim it as they learned it.
Spark had become flame. The Correspondence Bible College began in 1886 with an impressive enrollment of 200 students from around the U.S. as well as Canada and Australia. But Ashley Johnson soon felt that he could better train students at a resident school that took on a name.
The School of the Evangelists was burning on the altar of my heart. I told my wife about it. She could not comprehend it. I wrote my friends about it. They gave me the greatest discouragement of which they were capable.
This fire of purpose that burned within him could not be extinguished. Its light and warmth guided him to buy his great-grandfather Jacob Kimberlin's farm, where he would build his home and school.
Of course, one of the biggest issues that faced Ashley and Emma Johnson was support. They had a fairly strong financial base through the Correspondence Bible College. Ashley's books were well published, and a lot of those books then were used for those lessons. He traveled widely, not only here locally in Tennessee, but he developed friendships in Indiana and Kentucky, Ohio. He traveled often to raise support.
The school was founded in 1893 and opened to 42 young men early the following year. Knowing many were too poor to afford tuition, Ashley Johnson offered education in exchange for farm work. The school grew in numbers and facilities, but insufficient funds and unforeseen events threatened Johnson's dream. Even after the burning of the main building in 1904, he remained undeterred.
The open door before the poor young man who desires above every other desire to preach, so rudely closed, must and shall be opened again.
God kindled the school anew through passionate faith, hard work, and answered prayers that brought just enough support to keep the lights on. students from across the North American continent flocked to the school, increasing its size and bringing change.
As the story goes, there was a student petition late in 1908, early 1909, that recognized that it was no longer a school, it was a college, a real college, and the name should reflect it, and that the name should honor the founders. It's clear that Ashley and Emma were beloved by the students, and the students wanted to honor them. So in 1909, the school's name was changed to Johnson Bible College.
The school experienced further growth in new facilities and improved faculty. But as the college strengthened, Ashley Johnson's health had weakened. Prone to headaches and weary of body, Johnson addressed his boys one last time in 1925 before leaving Knoxville for medical treatment, never to see his boys again.
If we do not meet here again, we will meet on heaven's golden strand, where there will be no more parting, nor sorrow, nor tears. Boys, come and bring others with you.
Of course, Emma was a full and equal partner with Ashley from the very beginning of their educational ventures. She was really functioning as president the last 10 years of Ashley's life. So she became, as far as we can tell, the first female president of an all-male or even a co-educational school in American history.
So Emma Johnson devoted herself to her new office, advised by a few professors and aided by her diligent student assistant.
Emma had struggled with cancer. In 1923, she had breast cancer, and cancer returned in 1926, and this time it was her lung, and that was ultimately the cause of her death.
In less than 3 years, Mrs. Johnson has followed her husband into the land unseen. Will their work live on? Will the institution hold faith with their ideals and beliefs? In less than 3 years, Mrs. Johnson has followed her husband into the land unseen. Will their work live on? Will the institution hold faith with their ideals and beliefs?
These were questions knowingly penned by Alva Ross Brown, that hard-working assistant the Johnsons came to regard as the son they never had. No one could have known what part this young man would play in the history of the college.
I write this to introduce to you my helper and successor as president of Johnson Bible College when I have departed to be with Christ. His understanding of the New Testament and the ideals of the college are identical to the founders.
Emma and Ashley knew Brown very well. They thought so highly of him, and clearly that was reciprocal. Brown spoke so highly of Emma.
He began working in the office with the Johnsons, began taking on more and more responsibility. Emma clearly from the beginning saw Alva Ross Brown as her successor, even though he was very, very young, 21 years old when he was appointed the president. Not everyone, of course, saw the logic in the appointment of Alva Ross Brown as president, even to the point that the trustees first of all went to Alva Ross Brown and asked him to decline. And so really over the protests, Brown accepted the presidency and became, again, what we believe to be the youngest president of a college university in the history of American education, higher education.
The challenges of this transition were compounded by the onset of the Great Depression, which greatly reduced the college's income through the 30s.
There were times when faculty members did not get paid, and so the fact that this was really a self-sufficient farm really helped see through many of the difficulties of the Great Depression.
Most of us have our difficulties in trying to keep an eye single to His will, but there is comfort in remembering His infinite compassion and love.
Amidst these struggles, Brown improved academics and expanded student life. But these years weighed on the young president's spirit and health. He was often seen walking the campus at night, looking prayerfully at the lights from the hill.
Without prayer, I would not want to do the work I am doing. These buildings, the men, might be here without prayer, but I would not.
A leaking heart valve caused Brown's health to decline. At first, he showed signs of improvement, but then died suddenly of heart failure in 1941 at only 35 years of age. His close friend and Johnson trustee, Dr. Robert M. Bell, spoke at his funeral.
I had thought that the time would come when I should put out to sea, and Alvaros Brown would be standing by the water's edge. But it is I who stand at the water's edge and say to you who knew him and loved him, weep not.
Over the years, Dr. Bell had distinguished himself as a student, professor, and trustee at Johnson. The character and abilities he had demonstrated led the board to select him as the school's new president.
When I accepted the presidency, I firmly resolved that whatever happens, I will not worry. But within a week, my resolution was badly bent. Within a month, it was battered and broken. The trouble? Debts. Bills, 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 and no money to pay them.
When Dr. Bell became the president in 1941, the debt itself was about $50,000. And if you put that in 2017 terms, that would be over $650,000 in debt. And so it was seemingly insurmountable.
Aided by Bell's knowledge of economics, the school's overdue accounts had been erased by the end of his first year. But much work lay ahead. A light in Bell's office window was often seen burning late into the night.
When Bell was an economics professor at UT, he did these what we would call today workshops or seminars for local bankers. He had access to resources, so he used that access to be able to borrow money judiciously, to consolidate debt, to pay off debt. And then the other part is he believed that the alumni needed to play a much stronger role in helping the school's finances.
Once finances stabilized, a gym, student housing, a chapel, and a new library were designed by Bell and built largely through the work-study program. His efforts didn't merely keep the school's torch burning, but helped it burn brighter as a
preacher training institution in a preacher growing atmosphere.
One of Dr. Bell's greatest achievements was the expansion of the faculty. He hired several faculty members who served long tenures and were very influential, not only in their service to the college, but their service to the kingdom.
Academic growth under Dr. Bell, of course, the first and from a long-term perspective, most important was that the school went co-educational. There were a few programs for women, and of course that opened the door for more programs for women down the road.
As Johnson's light burned brightly, Dr. Bell's light dimmed suddenly. Just before the 1968 homecoming, he suffered a heart attack. During the Thursday afternoon session, his daughter Betty stepped forward.
My father was a marvelous man, and he was fully dedicated to Johnson Bible College, and he worked hard, and he did what the Lord wanted him to do. And it's the end of an era. It was a marvelous era, and I'm glad to have been a part of it.
In the absence of Dr. Bell, the torch would need the care of new hands in a new era. Leadership of the school fell to young Johnson professor, Dr. David Eubanks.
I really had no idea that I was being considered the presidency of Johnson. I was very humbled, felt greatly inadequate for the task, but I told him that I would talk it over with Margaret, we'd pray about it, and give him a decision. A few weeks later, I did.
If Bell had brightened Johnson's flame, Dr. Eubanks would seek to broaden it for greater kingdom impact, championing the school and the Christian service opportunities it offered like none had before. He quickly gained respect as a servant leader and tireless ambassador.
Our mission is to educate students for specialized Christian service, with primary emphasis on preaching.
New opportunities led to a doubled student population in the early 70s, creating a desperate need for increased facilities and additional scholarships.
I'm not for sure I have a ready answer to why we grew as we did. I had made a commitment when I became president to provide more options, career options for women students.
We also were one of the first of the so-called Bible colleges to be accredited, and through Dr. Eubanks' primary leadership on that, we were accredited in 1979.
Over the years, numerous buildings were added, including a new main building, an activity center, and dining hall. It was left to Dr. Eubanks to lead in raising support to make these developments possible. Through faithful friends, the work of faculty and staff, and the prayers of all, God supplied needed funds for continued growth and financial stability. And this strength allowed Johnson's light to shine in new areas.
There also was a strong emphasis on world missions. There was not a missions program, and yet Johnson put out more missionaries than nearly any school.
Of course, the brightest developments that happened was this China connection. Due to Dr. Templer's efforts, our students began to go to China. I've traveled, I think now, to near on to 50 countries, and a lot of those trips have been to visit alumni serving on the mission field.
In the early 2000s, enrollment doubled again, requiring a great expansion of facilities. Dr. Eubanks, cherished for his devoted leadership, announced his plans to retire. Upon this retirement, he had served as Johnson's president for an astounding 38 years. In 2007, Dr. Eubanks passed the torch to Dr. Gary Weidman.
Well, I could say that Dr. Weidman was chosen president because he was one of my students and was the first professor that I hired.
Dr. Weidman and I actually started at Johnson together in the fall of 1961. Since then, he's gone on to become a distinguished graduate, having served as an administrator and a dean and a provost at different educational institutions.
He's very knowledgeable of the heritage and the history and the philosophy and the mission of Johnson. He's a Johnson man. He was just a whole package.
The first time the board talked to me about it, I said anybody would want to be crazy to follow David Eubanks. So I knew it was a daunting task to come here in this role. On the other hand, I knew the condition and the reputation and the constituent support that the school had, like no other school in our brotherhood.
Under Dr. Weidman, 21 new programs began, allowing the education of students for more areas of service than ever before, including urban studies, business administration, sport and fitness leadership, and leadership studies, Johnson's first doctorate. These new programs, developing international connections and a desire to help alumni serving in challenging foreign countries, led to a new name and a revised mission statement.
Johnson University educates students for Christian ministries and other strategic vocations framed by the Great Commission in order to extend the kingdom of God among all nations.
Johnson had embraced an expanded view of ministry while holding on to its biblical focus. But President Weidman's insightful efforts also laid a foundation for future growth by organizing the university into 8 schools. Little did he know how soon that growth would occur.
Jim Book, the chairman of Florida Christian College's trustees, called me in 2012 and asked if we at Johnson would assume the ownership and the management of their college. I got a phone call from the president of Florida Christian College, and I was the chairman of the trustees at the time, and said, Jim, we got some bad news. Regional accreditation is no longer going to look favorably at Florida Christian College.
They lost their accreditation in a unique way. They were the first school in the Accrediting Association to lose accreditation solely for financial reasons, and we had the capacity to help the financial struggles that they were having.
Under Dr. Weidman's discerning guidance, Johnson Bible College has become Johnson University, with 4 campuses, including an online platform, and Extend Ed, a network of partner locations. More than 1,300 students are being served through the far-reaching influence of these campuses.
So much has happened in our relationship to China. Last summer, I was in China having a meal with a good friend of mine who's in the Provincial Office of Education. And I was telling him, can you believe the Ministry of Education approved our degree? And he smiled and said, Gary, Johnson University is the only Christian university that has an approved master's degree in China.
The torch hasn't stopped spreading its light from Kimberlin Heights since the birth of the School of Evangelists in 1893. But 125 years later, it is once again time for new leadership to carry the flame.
This is my 50th year in higher education, working in higher education. I started here, and I'm ending here 50 years later. I will be within 2.5 months of being 75. Those are pretty good indicators, I think, that it's time for me to go. Plus, I was sure that there were good candidates who could step in.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. and Mrs. Tommy Smith.
It's so encouraging to have received the kind of support that we've received. I'm very pleased that I have this opportunity, and I want to make the most of that opportunity that God has given me to lead this great university.
So another chapter begins at Johnson University. A new torchbearer steps forward to lead because of a single spark. Students with a passion for sharing the gospel leave Johnson's doors and spread across the globe, a world in need of God's light.